So what I'm going to do is, I guess I have about 30 minutes, and I'm going to talk a little bit about a new solution for the financial services industry, and one that hopefully touches on a number of the issues raised earlier today, particularly by Simon. I'm going to talk about this a little bit in concept because what we're contemplating here has not yet received formal approval within the BVI. But something hopefully that will really change the landscape of financial services in the BVI for years to come. So what is being contemplated is a group of partners based in Asia today have submitted an application for what would be the first bank in the BVI in over 20 years. The bank would be specifically dedicated to the offshore industry, so as of right now not taking deposits or making loans on the island, but really to solve some of these key issues. And I just highlight sort of four of the opportunities for the bank. One is the size. I mean, account openings today is really a global problem, and that is brought on by post-financial crisis, compliance costs, compliance issues at the large institutions, unnecessary to some extent regulation, but certainly multi-jurisdictional regulation, technology that has been put in place many years ago and has yet to be updated, and frankly, the overhang from the fines and wrongdoings that have been plagued the industry over the course of the last 5 to 10 years. So in part, the opportunity for us is really to service a large chunk of the 450 to 500,000 BVI BCs and their issues of opening bank accounts to transact around the world, particularly with half of those concentrated in China, and those of us who are working to set this up being in Asia. It gives us a very focused group to look to sort of start the business. And I think underlying this also is, if we can solve the problem for the business companies, we can hopefully then have our business evolve to where we are solving the wealth needs of what effectively is a captive audience in China of about $6 trillion within the high net worth community, and growing at around 15% a year. And I think aside from as we spend a lot of time on China, there are equal opportunities in Southeast Asia and the other BRICS countries to do effectively the same thing, which is to sort of crack this account opening issue. I think, from our standpoint, and I'm sort of on number 3 here, one of the great privileges I think that we have is really to build a bank right for this era. One of the things we will focus very heavily on is technology. You would not see a branch that has our name on it anywhere in the world. What you would have is you have best-in-class technology that sits in front of a consumer that we interface with. So the account opening process in large extent will be done without a great deal of human interaction. What does that do for us? It makes it quick, it makes it cost-effective, you take human bias out of the equation, and what that essentially does is it makes it a wholly different experience for the consumer. One of the other things, and again, this gets to the second point, which is speed. We want to be able to not only open accounts for our customers, we want to be able to do it fast. Oftentimes, for a business company, if they're even able to get an account today, it takes 30 to 45 days. We'd like to be able to do that in a week, if not a day, to the extent we have the information to make the critical know your customer decision. I think one of the things, and I'll talk about this in a little bit, one of the things we want to be very focused on is being very different when it comes to understanding and assessing risk. Compliance and regulatory functions within banks today have no incentive to say yes to a customer. All they want to do is say no. And I think if you take compliance and risk and you make them part of the management team and incent them in the right way, you change the interaction with the client. No longer is it an interrogation, no longer is it guilty until proven innocent. It is a collaborative process of gathering facts and information to just make good decisions. And I think the other piece of this is that we will have, provided we are successful with the FSC here, we will have one jurisdiction, one regulator, which really changes the way in which we can conduct our business. The BVI FSC, if we are successful, will be the only regulator of the bank. And I think just as important as I think the overall strategy, which some of this speaks to, is that to date this has been this project, and this project has been sort of underway now for roughly 15 months, I think, where the initial issue was raised, is the collaboration between ourselves and a number of constituencies around the world. In part, the BVI government, who has been a great partner to date, governments in Asia, particularly China and Hong Kong, to be supportive of what we're trying to do and really helping us facilitate money movements around the world. The service providers, many of which are in the room here today, and their counterparts in Asia, and our investors, the investors who will invest in the bank and be clients in the bank. So just very quickly, just give, so everyone has a bit of a context where this came from. Obviously the problem to solve is very simple, account openings. And what does that happen? What has that done with the BVI is you've seen declines in the number of new applications, new incorporations per year, and to some extent a risk of erosion of BVI's unique market position. So in the latter part of 2014, the BVI actually put forward this problem to the visionary, who you will hear from a little bit later, Carson Wen, in front of me, to help solve a problem, this account opening problem. And so the concept was then circulated in Asia as to how best to approach this, whether it be an existing Asian bank to come to the BVI or something else. And so a significant amount of research and due diligence went into this. And it was ultimately concluded that really the only way to solve this problem, the best way to solve the problem, was to really start a new bank, start fresh. Clean sheet of paper, do it as we would do in this era. No mistakes of the past, no legacy technology, no legacy culture, but really get to sort of set this up as I think anyone in this room with the knowledge would do it today. I think, and then in sort of the latter half of 2015, we as a team developed a comprehensive strategy and developed an execution plan as to how we would do this. We established a steering committee in Asia, and then also with the support of Mrs. Smith and Joyce Marine, who I know is in the room, to help us from the BVI's perspective. And we finally made the application for restricted class license to the BVI FSC, and we were successful in raising our first round of capital. Going forward for 2016, the first order of business is to do what we can to secure the license, which, as I said, would be the first that the BVI FSC has issued in 20 years for the banking community, to finish building out our technology infrastructure, which is critical to our business, to hire some additional staff in Asia, as well as start to hire the staff that we would need in the BVI. In terms of capital for this business, our intended initial capital would be 150 million US, that's equity capital. And though we don't have the figures of what the branches or subsidiaries would be that are existing in the BVI today, I suspect this would probably be the largest bank in the BVI if you sort of were able to look and isolate the bank. Our target to go live and be operational is, let's call it the middle of the year, early third quarter 2016. The key milestones in order to get there would be the finishing off of the technology, establishing the correspondent banking relationships around the world, and then I think making a decision exactly what products and services we would need to roll out in day one. Guiding principles of the bank, as I'm going to go through these very quickly, very focused. Early on, we are focused on first generation Chinese high net worth investor who owns a BC in the BVI and has an account opening problem. That will obviously expand to other geographies. As I said, this is very much a global problem, but that is our focus on day one. And also, to be very simple, we will not try to be complex in the products and services we will issue and we will offer on day one. We'll basically look to typical transaction banking services and then traditional banking services, growing over time into wealth management and asset management with a degree of success. As I said, very important that we partner with our shareholders, we partner with our employees, most importantly, we partner with the people in this room to make this work for everyone involved. Um, I think the rest of this capital light, operating sustainably, responsibly, hopefully those go without saying. But I think what's also very important is while we are very much an offshore bank, what we want to do is play a critical role in real economy developments. You will hear a little bit later around something called One Belt, One Road, or the Belt and the Road. That is an initiative that starts in China and cuts across all the way to Europe, something we want to be able to deploy capital into. And again, this is the last point, and I keep saying this over and over, but really being a true partner to the BVI in its economic development. One of the things I think is critical, and this gets a little bit to immigration that was talked about earlier, which is really to help shift from a booking center, which is just money moving from point A to point B, which in the middle of the night happens to touch the BVI, but there's really no money that you actually see floating around the island. There's no real brick and mortar. And one of the things I think that this bank has the opportunity to change in financial services for the BVI is to really start to see this economy here, this sector, start to look much more like a financial center. If you were to take a snapshot of what the Caymans look like and the snapshot of what Roadtown looked like, very, very different landscape. And that is a function of real deposits sticking on the island that are then turned around and lent out into the community, obviously on an international basis. Also, I think it's very critical that the bank maintain its ties to Asia. These are extremely important as the linkage between China and the BVI continues to solidify, both in terms of the number of incorporations, but there are many other ways in which the two geographies can do business. This is, I think, as fundamental to anything in our business model is what does KYC and AML mean to us. KYC at the very heart of it is just knowing your client and knowing how they conduct business, and once you do that, then you can sort of be able to process business for them. How do we sort of approach this? Again, best technology. We don't have legacy systems. We get to sort of start from scratch and look at what's best in the industry today. Secondly is, and this is probably as critical as anything, having better data, having better analytics to know our customer better than another institution would. That gives us the opportunity and the confidence to make better decisions around who are good clients and who are the ones that should not be part of the bank. And in certain cases, using humans, using foot soldiers, as we sort of describe them, to go out and do enhanced due diligence in cases where it's either a very large client, a very complex situation, but again, by focusing, and this is sort of on the right, focusing on China early on, we can do a better job of knowing the profile of those types of clients, which helps us have a higher percentage of onboarding within the bank. Second, as I talked about earlier, limiting human bias and error. This is, again, being a very technology-forward bank and using that to the extent we can to make our decisions and only involving the human being in the equation when necessary. That helps us from a regular standpoint. It helps us when we are audited to be able to show that we were consistent in the way in which we onboarded our clients. Talking about earlier, customer service. Again, it's not an interrogation. This is a fact-finding mission, and critical is that when that client or potential client walks out of the room, they feel as if they had a good experience. They feel as if we made the decision quickly, fairly, and we treated them with respect. And as I said earlier, very critical to this is that we're very commercially oriented. It's very easy in compliance and risk to say no to someone. If we do that to every client, we will not have a business. Our job is actually to say yes unless there's data to say that we should say no to a client. And I think critical to that is that the way in which we operate the management team of our business, compliance and risk, is part of the executive committee. They're not pushed aside as sort of a back office function. They are critical to the way in which we conduct our business, and they are incented in an appropriate way to be managers, partners, investors in the business. And lastly, any KYC, it does not end with initial decision, constant continuance due diligence as to the activities of our clients as they become more complex, as they change the way in which they conduct business. We have to be on top of that so that, again, the client changes, we need to make sure we know the client. And very quickly, how we will roll the bank out. First, transactional banking, which is movement of monies, payment processing, very simple transactions. Traditional banking, as we take on deposits, those deposits staying here, and ultimately lending. I think if you sort of said, where do we have the go live date of our bank? It's at the end of sort of number 2 there. Very, very basic transactional banking business, very basic traditional banking, and that's when we sort of make the decision we're ready to onboard a client. And over time, moving into much more fiduciary services, advisory, that both being corporate advisory and helping structure the business companies, helping in M&A, IPO advisory. At the individual level, wealth management services, again, very much a distribution-oriented model. We're not necessarily early on looking to manufacture a great deal of products, but rather facilitating the movement of wealth from one party to another. And then ultimately the investment management, and Carson will speak to this a little bit, which is very, very specific, targeted, and sophisticated investment management product for clients. But we will not sort of get into that for some significant period of time. But ultimately, this is, I think, the platform that we are trying to create if we're successful and for some period of time down the road, which is what we would describe as a merchant bank. Merchant bank being very much a partner to our clients. Once we open an account, what else can we do for them? We can help facilitate transactions. We can advise them. We can arrange things. We can syndicate to the extent they need a big loan and we're not large enough to basically hold all of that. We can help move the rest of it to other parties. Obviously, we can lend, and in certain situations, to the extent they need equity investment, we will be a partner to them and be an investor. This is sort of, I think, the vision. We will start, in a very basic sense, try to solve a very simple issue, but this is ultimately the way in which I think we want to be interact with our clients down the road. And just lastly, I just wanted to touch on this, and we sort of think about onboarding or bringing investors into our business. What is the story? The story is that we have developed projections that are very conservative. The size of our business, we would like to, within 5 years, be a $200 million revenue business, generating ROEs in the high 30%. One of the things we want to, again, stay very technology focused in our business, which means less people in our business, means less compensation, higher margins for our investors. High degree of optionality simply means we think there are a tremendous number of opportunities in multiple areas of financial services, not just banking. And I think because of the heavy emphasis on technology, we think we have the opportunity to move into those down the road. Valuation, again, as I said, we will look to sort of capitalize the bank at $150 million. We've had tremendous amount of interest from outside investors who, you tell the story about account opening and everyone nods their head. And these are people who don't own BVI BCs. These are just the average person on the street. And so there's been a great deal of interest. We hope to have outside investors be around 50% of the ownership of the company. And our target in terms of valuation is roughly a $400 million valuation at the end of the year. But I think just to sum it all up, again, we are the private. Hopefully we are a part of the solution. We are the private market piece of the solution, but without the collaboration, continuous on a day-to-day basis with everyone on the island, government, corporate service providers, and everyone else involved, we will never be able to achieve, I think, what the full opportunity is here. Okay. How do we do on time? Good? Yeah. Can I take a couple questions? Yeah, yeah. Carson? A minute? A little later? Okay. Questions?
Yeah, I'll take some questions.
Any questions? Yes. Robert.
Congratulations. This is a tremendous opportunity. Really a brilliant move. Oh, sorry. think it's congratulations. This is a brilliant move. I do have one question regarding the technology. And is there any opportunity for regulators in mainland China to, would there be any opportunity for them to try to touch this organization in terms of the technology?
Right, okay. Technology, I think we look at in two pieces. One is the backbone of the business, how the technology allows the business to operate. One of the things we've been very focused here is really to go to a best-in-class provider, one that a regulator, no one around the world would ever argue is sophisticated, used by other institutions. The second is the front-end technology, which we want to be very disruptive and innovative. That's the technology that interfaces with the client. As it relates to sort of China, and I guess we're sort of getting to cybersecurity issues, data security.
Source code, that's right.
Exactly. One of the keys there is where is the data housed? Once you sort of get past the account opening process, what would anybody in our organization see? What they'd see is a number. The data would be housed, if not in the BVI, some very, very remote offshore center. Even though most of our staff is in Hong Kong and we operate in China, nothing when it comes to data would be in Asia, anywhere close to China, anywhere close to Hong Kong, anywhere close to Singapore for that matter. Because the moment it sits there, you run the risk that that regulator has the opportunity. And that, look, privacy is still a key element of this. It's part of the reason why people come here. And we need to do everything in our power to make sure that we maintain the integrity of the data and the privacy to the extent we can for the customer. Yeah.
Thank you. Chad, just two questions really. One, would we have clearing bank capability? As you know, at the moment everything has to clear through the US.
Yeah.
Transaction costs naturally are being competitive on transaction banking costs become difficult then. And the second question, would your clientele be limited to BVI BC companies?
Right. First question, correspondent banking, great question. It's one of the challenges that every bank, every small startup bank, any mid-sized bank faces today, which is, what are the economics to the correspondent bank versus what is the risk that they don't know us? And again, it's a KYC issue. And there have been something on the order of 15 to 20 banks in the Caribbean who have actually lost their correspondent banking relationships because simply the economics didn't make sense. To the question of U.S. Counterparty, we certainly need U.S. dollar clearing. We need clearing in other currencies. Likely the solution here, once we get sort of through a regulator strategy of being proactive and going seeing U.S., UK regulator and Chinese regulator, is likely the solution here will actually be an Asian counterparty to this who clears U.S. dollar. I think probably there's just too much. There's too much volatility right now. There's just too much heightened issues around the U.S. banks and this issue to believe that we could probably walk in and establish that relationship early on. And so you had a second question.
Whether the clientele would be limited to...
Oh, to BVIBCs. No, I mean, I think that's the initiative, the mandate effectively the bank received early on from the government here was to solve the issue on behalf of those. I think that certainly is something that is the first priority. But again, this is a global issue. It's a global issue of account opening. And I actually think one of the interesting ways in which we will be very helpful once we stem the tide of the incorporations slowing or being reduced and hopefully changing that trend is to actually go to other parts of the world where the same issue arises. And instead of a Russian going to Cyprus or an Indian going to Mauritius, we solve the problem there. Hopefully what we do is they say, well, it's much easier if I have my bank account in the BVI, I might as well incorporate in the BVI as opposed to Mauritius, the Seychelles, or these. So I actually think there's a pretty good logic once we get past this sort of hopefully low-hanging fruit that we can sort of change actually the profile of who of where the underlying owner sits for the BVI-BC.
I want to thank you, Chad, and I want to say one thing. When you have the mic, you can say a little few words. This is another game changer. I asked the Premier earlier, he's so modest. What keeps him up at night? This kept him up at night for many, if I could say so, for many, many, many months. And I know that his travels to Asia it has always been on the front burner. I want to thank you for the presentation, and we certainly wish you all the success. The good gentleman sitting in the front, Carsten, will speak later, who is really the vision behind it. We do want to thank him, and I see it as another homegrown solution. We have a problem, how do we step up to the plate? And sometimes you've got to sit down, think about things, because the nuances are particular to BVI's case, and find a solution to them. So we wish you all the best, and we expect that you will stay on schedule to open as planned.
Do our best.
Thank you.
Thank you.